I think one thing that we were talking yesterday about coalitions, how to share information, data, best practices, all of those things. I think staying in touch with and making sure that there's ways for people to track what's coming out of Colorado may be incredibly useful. Polling, different models for how to extricate money out of the hands of those who are already billionaires and trillionaires, and those who are going to become even more wealthy through this process. One of the things that Mark brought up is the idea of wealth funds, and what has happened in Alaska over the long term, and how to build that permanent fund that can continue year in and year out to distribute funds. And so this idea of how we fund this work and how different kinds of funding mechanisms or models feels like an important part of this conversation as well. So I'm really excited to bring up Hanh from the IF Foundation, a Foundation for Radical Possibilities, to share a little bit of what the work they're doing in this space.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, as Stacy shared, I'm Hanh. I'm with IF, a Foundation for Radical Possibility here in Washington, D.C. We are a racial justice foundation that is rooted in the DMV, and I'm excited to talk to you about Let's Go DMV, or Let's Guarantee Opportunity in the DMV. And for those who don't know, that's not just where you get your driver's license, it's the district, suburban Maryland, and Northern Virginia for us here. Let's Go DMV is a local guaranteed income pilot that we've had the honor of being a part of since 2020. So this photo up here is from a celebration that we did on a chilly April afternoon in 2022, soon after we started cash distributions to about 70 hospitality workers who had lost work because of COVID. You'll see kind of from the right, the second to the right adult, you'll see V. Tucker. I actually think V is here somewhere in the room. Okay, get her in here, because I want to tell the story about how V was the spark and the fuel for our pilot. You'll hear more from V along with my colleague Ro from IF and one of our pilot participants, Margarita, later this afternoon in the community celebration. We'll premiere our film about the pilot. But for now, I want to tell you the story about how V inspired Let's Go DMV, including the impact investing financing model that we explored to try to pay for it. So let's start by flashing back to 2020, right? And the devastating impact that COVID-19 had on our communities, in particular, our workers and Black and brown people and people of the global majority. When COVID hit, V, like many of her fellow hospitality workers, were sent home from work, right? And as folks' income was cut, their expenses continued to pile up and mount, and V did what V does. V was a longtime organizer with Restaurant Opportunity Center, DC, or ROC DC, and V went into community care and community organizing mode. And one of the things that she wanted to do was to start a GoFundMe campaign to raise cash to support hospitality workers who've lost their work because of COVID, to help pay bills and expenses, right? So V was embarking on this GoFundMe campaign to raise some money, and then she remembered something, right? In 2019, IF, which was then the Consumer Health Foundation, we had convened something we called Foundation Learning Days. And this was a popular and political education series that we developed as we were deepening our commitment to centering community in our foundation and in philanthropy more broadly. At Foundation Learning Days, community members teamed up with others to learn about racialized capitalism, how private foundations are rooted in it and continue to accumulate wealth through racialized capitalism, and how we, right, have these endowments that we invest to earn money and use just the interest, right, earned from a portion of the interest earned from those investments to pay for our expenses like grants and things. And oftentimes those investments are made into systems and institutions that are extractive, right, and actually contradicting the work that the foundation says that is its mission to do. So V remembered this, right, how foundation investing worked. And so she went to IF's then president and CEO, my predecessor, Yannick Redwood, and said, if she could raise $30,000 or so in cash to assist hospitality workers, could she give half of that or a portion of that to IF, right? So we can invest it like we do with our endowment, and it would grow, and there would be more money to give out in cash to workers. So Yannick talked about this with our treasurer, and they said, this is an amazing idea. They also knew that $30,000 probably wouldn't yield the return needed in the time needed to really be of assistance to the workers who are suffering in the moment because of the COVID crisis. But they thought, you know who does have the capital, right, to make this scale of investment and fund something like a whole guaranteed income pilot, and that is endowed foundations. So, you know, though IF had a good deal of knowledge in investing, in community engagement, and certainly in philanthropy, we knew we needed to pull together a table of partners that could help us flesh out this project and how to pay for it and how to administer a guaranteed income pilot, because that was all new to us. So we brought together at this table, you know, at the center was Rock DC because of their relationship with the workers, with V, and their history of organizing, right, for worker rights and economic justice in the city. We brought together the Greater Washington Community Foundation, our regional community foundation, because of their track record in mobilizing donors and funders and also supporting a lot of cash programs, especially around COVID. We brought in our Regional Association of Grant Makers, Philanthropy DMV, which unfortunately no longer exists, but was doing a lot around funder education and convening funders, right, for racial justice. And then we also brought in Amalgamated Bank and Amalgamated Foundation because of their expertise in financing and investment. So that was our table of partners. And so together, that table of partners, which included V and her colleague, Glenda Rodriguez, developed 3 goals for a 5-year guaranteed income pilot. The first goal was that we wanted to provide $1,000 a month, no strings attached, to hospitality workers in the DC region who had lost their jobs due to COVID. We also wanted to rally foundations, corporations, and individual donors to raise money and deploy capital and make impact investments needed to sustain the GI payments over the duration of the project. And then we wanted to work to build a coalition to make the case for government-supported guaranteed income programs and policies that advance economic justice. So I am not a finance person, so you know, Amalgamated, our friends at Amalgamated had a lot of fancy charts and graphs. I'm gonna use a lot of words to explain what we tried to do. So for the impact investing financing model, essentially what we wanted to do was we wanted to educate and mobilize funders, particularly foundations in the DMV, to engage more in impact investing, right? Foundations, despite their missions, right, are putting, as I mentioned, a lot of their money, their endowments, into investments that are actually harming our communities and certainly not intentionally advancing, you know, our communities and equity and justice in our communities. So we knew we needed to mobilize folks. There was an opportunity to galvanize the moment to get folks to do more impact investing in general, as well as to support this guaranteed income pilot. And then we would need to pool and deploy philanthropic capital for local impact investments that would go directly into our region and advance racial equity. So things like Black and Brown enterprise development, things like affordable housing, right, that would benefit the region and advance equity. And then we wanted to generate return from those impact investments for the projects to cover the project's actual guaranteed income payments as well as the infrastructure costs for the project. So starting in 2021, we worked for 2 years at least to try to make this impact investing model possible. We explored a variety of things, including working with intermediaries like Calvert, Impact Capital, Capital Impact Partners, Activist, and many more, to try to work with them to provide an impact investment offerings for foundations that would meet the foundation's investment due diligence needs and requirements and yield the interest that we would need to generate revenue for Let's Go DMV to sustain it. We even explored the creation of our own LLC to create an impact investment fund that we would then raise funds for from foundations and manage them, right, ourselves with the assistance of others. And, as we were kind of figuring out how to make this finance investing model work and still not putting money in the hands of workers, right, we decided and we realized that we needed to go ahead and start raising philanthropic grants so that we can get money out there. And so we did that, and we're able to make our first GI payments in early 2022. In the end, the pilot was fully funded by traditional grants. The impact investing model did not pan out as we had hoped, right? And so, but we think there are a lot of lessons learned, and we haven't given up on leveraging philanthropy, financial markets, et cetera, to finance economic justice efforts like guaranteed income. So we can talk a little bit about, so what happened, right? What were the challenges? A major challenge was the costs associated. When our friends at Amalgamated Bank did the modeling, the estimated costs of establishing and managing the impact investment exceeded the revenue that would likely be generated, right? So was the juice worth the squeeze? That was a question we found ourselves asking a lot, and a lot of foundations that we tried to, get to join us in this also asked that question. Timing was also a challenge. There was a very direct need in the community for cash, and the amount of time that would be needed to establish an investment fund, raise the capital from foundations, and get approval from their investment committees, which are not easy folks to get approval from, and then to deploy that capital to make the GI payments to participants those timelines were not syncing up. And then the types of investments that made sense for what foundations wanted or needed and what we needed were likely not attractive to foundations and their investment committees. And then also market conditions weren't great, right? It likely was, we wouldn't see the amount of interest that we would need related to that first factor around cost to pay for the pilot. So the bottom line is, it would have been, even if we were able to set up an impact investment, it would have been a tough case to make to foundations, assuming that they were even ready to engage more in impact investing, right, which was its own hurdle in general for the sector. And often foundations just would say to me, it's like, Han, this is what we do. We invest our endowments, and then we take the interest to make grants. Why do we have to do something different than we're already doing, right? But for us, there was an opportunity to actually move foundations to engage more in impact investing. So, given that the impact investment model wasn't successful, right, or didn't play out as we had hoped, what did we do? We revised the goals for our pilot, right? We made the really hard decision, and hardest on our pilot participants, that instead of 5 years of GI payments, we would do 3 years. So we wrapped up payments at the end of last year, and all of that was supported by foundation grants. Instead of getting foundations into an impact investment that would generate returns to pay for the guaranteed income, we realized that there was still a lot of funder education and capacity building that needs to be done around impact investing in general. And then, we continue to invest in building narrative and worker power to make the case for government-supported guaranteed income. Because even if philanthropy steps in, and we know that philanthropy needs to step in and step up even more, but even if it did, it will never be able to fill the gap, right? That should be filled by our government, right, to ensure that our people have economic stability. So, even though this impact investing attempt did not work for Let's Go DMV, the timing and the needs of Let's Go DMV, we still think there's a lot to continue to explore, and we're happy to do that with others who are interested in it, right? And so at IF, we are about radical possibilities, and we like to ask what-if questions. And so I want to leave you with some questions now to hopefully spark your imagination for later when we move into kind of the planning work as a collective, and for when you go back to your communities and do your dreaming and building work there. We want to ask, what if philanthropy and guaranteed income were truly community-centered? And by community, we mean those living at the sharpest intersections of systems of oppression, namely race, class, and gender. We want to ask, what if foundations used all of our assets, our grants, our endowments, our social political capital for justice, right? And then what if the intentionally opaque and overcomplicated world of finance and investing were accessible to all? So just some fodder for your imagination. Thank you for the opportunity to share about Let's Go DMV, and look forward to co-conspiring with you.